The rain fell in sheets across New Berlin's industrial district, turning the narrow alleyways into rivers of filth and broken dreams. Zara pressed her back against the cold brick wall, her arm wrapped protectively around her younger sister Kira, who shivered uncontrollably beneath the tattered remains of what had once been their ceremonial clothing. The fabric, woven from the silk of their homeworld's sacred moths, now hung in strips that barely covered their pale blue skin. 3 months. 3 months since the evacuation ships had dumped them on this hostile planet with nothing but refugee identification chips embedded in their wrists and the promise of temporary resettlement assistance that never came. The Human authorities had processed them like cargo, assigned them numbers, and pointed them toward a shelter that turned them away the moment they saw their elongated limbs and the distinctive silver markings that traced their faces like living tattoos. "I'm so cold," Kira whispered in their native tongue, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. At 16, she should have been preparing for her coming-of-age ceremony on Vela's Prime. Instead, she was dying slowly on a planet that saw her as nothing more than an unwanted reminder of a war most humans preferred to forget. Zara tightened her grip on her sister, feeling the sharp edges of Kira's ribs through her skin. Neither of them had eaten in 2 days. The food distribution centers required permanent addresses, and every shelter in the city had found excuses to turn away the hostile aliens whose people had fought against the Earth Defense Coalition. It didn't matter that they had been children when the war began. It didn't matter that their parents had died protecting human prisoners from their own military's extremist faction. On Earth, they were simply the enemy's offspring, unwelcome reminders of a conflict that had cost millions of human lives. "Look at me," Zara said softly, cupping Kira's face in her hands. The silver markings around her sister's eyes had begun to fade, a sign of severe malnourishment that would soon become irreversible. "Do you remember the song Mother used to sing, the one about the twin moons?" Kira nodded weakly, and together they began to hum the ancient melody. Their voices, even weakened by hunger, carried the distinctive harmonic resonance of their species. The sound seemed to push back against the rain and the cold, creating a small bubble of warmth between them. A crash echoed from the far end of the alley as a garbage container overturned. Zara's hand instinctively moved the broken ceramic blade hidden in her clothing, the only weapon she had managed to salvage from their ship. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath hoods, but their intentions clear from the way they moved. Well, one of them called out in heavily accented English. "Look what we have here. A couple of bug-eyes singing their freaky songs in our neighborhood." Zara pulled Kira behind her, her malnourished body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. "We're just trying to find shelter," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her terror. "We don't want any trouble." The leader of the group laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the alley walls. "Trouble. You aliens brought trouble the moment you stepped foot on our planet. My brother died fighting your kind on Kepler Station. We weren't soldiers," Zara said desperately. "We were civilians. Children." "Children grow up to be soldiers," another voice snarled. "And you freaks breed like insects. Should have left you all to burn with your pathetic world." The words hit Zara like physical blows. She had seen the footage from the war's final days, the orbital bombardment that had turned Velos Prime's crystal cities into molten glass, the screaming millions who had died in the firestorm. Her parents among them, along with everyone she had ever known except for Kira. The 3 humans advanced slowly, savoring their advantage. Zara gripped the ceramic blade tighter, knowing it would do little good against multiple attackers. She had failed at everything else, finding food, finding shelter, finding hope. But she would not fail to protect her sister. "Stay behind me," she whispered to Kira, who was now sobbing quietly in their shared language. The leader reached into his jacket, and Zara saw the glint of metal. A knife much larger than her pathetic shard of ceramic. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized this was how it would end. Two sisters dying alone in a filthy alley, their deaths just another footnote in humanity's casual cruelty. But then the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the alley's mouth, accompanied by the steady rhythm of work boots on wet pavement. A new voice cut through the rain, deep and commanding. "Hey, what's going on down there?" The three attackers froze, turning toward the approaching figure. Through the rain and darkness, Zara could make out a tall human male wearing oil-stained coveralls and carrying what looked like a heavy tool bag. His dark hair was plastered to his skull by the downpour, and his brown eyes held an intensity that made the would-be attackers step backward. "Nothing that concerns you, grease monkey," the leader said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "Just taking out some trash." The newcomer set down his tool bag with deliberate care, the metal contents clanking ominously. "Those girls don't look like trash to me. They look like they need help." "They're aliens," one of the attackers protested. "Enemy combatants." "They're kids," the man replied simply. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, as if he were stating an immutable law of physics. "And in my neighborhood, we don't hurt kids. Any kids." The standoff stretched for long seconds, rain continuing to fall between them like a curtain of judgment. Finally, the leader spat onto the wet pavement. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he was already backing away, his companions following reluctantly. Within moments, the alley was empty except for Zara, Kira, and their unexpected savior. The man approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, as if he understood how frightened they were. "My name's Marcus," he said softly. "Marcus Chen. And you two look like you could use a hot meal and a warm place to sleep." Zara stared at Marcus Chen, her exhausted mind struggling to process his words. In 3 months on Earth, no human had offered them anything but hatred, fear, or indifference. The very concept of kindness from one of these people felt like a trap, too dangerous to believe. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking with disuse and emotion. "Why would you help us?" Marcus crouched down to their eye level, careful not to move too quickly. Up close, Zara could see the lines around his eyes, the calloused hands of someone who worked with his hands for a living. There was something different about him, a steadiness that reminded her of her father. "Because you're cold, hungry, and scared," he said simply. "That's reason enough for any decent person." Kira stirred weakly in Zara's arms, her silver markings barely visible in the dim light. "Sister," she murmured in their language, "I can't feel my feet anymore." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, even though he couldn't understand them. He saw the way the younger girl's lips had turned blue, the way her entire body trembled with hypothermia. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his heavy work jacket and held it toward them. "Here, get her warm," he said urgently. "We need to get you both inside before she goes into shock." Zara hesitated for a long moment, then carefully wrapped the jacket around Kira. The warmth trapped in the fabric from Marcus's body heat felt like a miracle, and for the first time in hours, Kira stopped shivering. "There's a soup kitchen 6 blocks from here," Marcus continued, shouldering his tool bag again. "But they won't serve your kind, will they?" The matter-of-fact way he said it, without judgment or accusation, surprised Zara. "No," she admitted. "Nowhere will." "Then we'll go to my place. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." He stood up slowly, extending his hand. "Can you walk?" Zara looked at his outstretched palm, scared, stained with motor oil, but steady and real. She had learned to distrust human hands. They had pointed guns, stamped rejection papers, and shoved her away from doorways. But something in Marcus's brown eyes made her take a leap of faith she hadn't thought herself capable of anymore. She grasped his hand and let him help her to her feet. Together, they lifted Kira, who was barely conscious now. Marcus supported most of her weight without complaint, leading them through the maze of industrial streets with sure, confident steps. His apartment was on the third floor of a converted warehouse, accessible by a narrow staircase that seemed to stretch forever. By the time they reached the landing, both sisters were gasping for breath, their alien physiology struggling with Earth's heavier atmosphere and their own weakened state. "Almost there," Marcus said gently, fishing keys from his pocket with his free hand. The door opened onto a small but immaculately clean living space. A kitchenette occupied one corner, while a battered couch faced an ancient television. The walls were lined with shelves containing books, tools, and what looked like electronic components in various stages of repair. It wasn't luxury, but it was undeniably home. "Bathroom's through there if you need it," Marcus said, nodding toward a door. "I'm going to get some soup started. When did you last eat?" 2 days ago, Zara admitted, helping Kira onto the couch. "We found some discarded food behind a restaurant." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he moved to the kitchenette and began pulling items from cupboards: canned soup, bread, a kettle for tea. His movements were efficient and practiced, as if he had done this before. "You've helped others," Zara observed, watching him work. It wasn't a question. "A few," he admitted, not turning around. "Refugees from the Centaur conflict mostly. Humans, but the principle's the same. People need help, you help them." Kira had fallen asleep on the couch, her breathing shallow, but more regular than it had been in the alley. Zara tucked Marcus's jacket more securely around her, then moved to the window. From here, she could see the lights of New Berlin stretching to the horizon. Millions of humans living their lives, most of them probably unaware that 2 alien girls were slowly dying in their midst. "The war," she said quietly, not looking away from the window. "Did you fight in it?" Marcus paused in his stirring, the spoon clicking against the pot's edge. "For a while, until I saw what we were really fighting for." "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, and she saw something haunted in his expression. "I was on the ground team that liberated the prison camp on Xerion VI. We expected to find human prisoners of war, maybe some intelligence data." He set down the spoon, his hands gripping the counter's edge. "Instead, we found 300 Volosian children who had been left to starve after their parents were executed for refusing to reveal military positions." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She remembered hearing about Xerion VI, the camp where political dissidents had been sent to die. Her own aunt had been imprisoned there. "Your people could have used those children as leverage," Marcus continued. "Could have traded them for military advantages or prisoner exchanges. Instead, they chose to let them die rather than compromise their principles. That's when I realized we weren't fighting monsters. We were fighting people who were just as capable of good and evil as we were." The soup began to bubble, filling the small apartment with the rich aroma of vegetables and herbs. Marcus ladled it into 2 bowls, then carried them to the couch where Kira was stirring. "Easy," he said gently as the girl tried to sit up. "Small steps at first. Your stomach needs time to adjust." Kira looked up at him with wide, silver-flecked eyes, then spoke rapidly in their native language. Zara translated automatically. "She wants to know if you're an angel. In our mythology, angels are beings who appear when hope is lost." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Tell her I'm just a mechanic who believes everyone deserves a chance." As the sisters ate their first real meal in days, color slowly returned to their faces. The silver markings around their eyes began to brighten, and Kira's hands stopped trembling. Marcus busied himself making tea, giving them space while staying close enough to help if needed. "Why aren't you afraid of us?" Zara asked between spoonfuls of soup. "Everyone else sees us and thinks of the war, of the soldiers who killed their friends and family. Because I see 2 girls who lost everything and are trying to survive," Marcus replied simply. "Fear makes people stupid, makes them forget that the individual isn't responsible for the actions of the group." Kira had managed to finish half her bowl before exhaustion overtook her again. She curled up on the couch, using Marcus's jacket as a blanket, and fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had since arriving on Earth. "She's so young," Marcus observed, watching the girl's face relax in sleep. 16. I'm 19. Zara set down her empty bowl, feeling strength flowing back into her limbs. "We should have been in university by now, studying to become architects like our parents. Instead you're here, alive, when millions of others aren't," Marcus finished. "That means something. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday it will mean something important." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first pale light of dawn was beginning to creep through the windows. Zara realized she had spent the entire night in safety for the first time since arriving on Earth. The sensation was so foreign, she almost didn't recognize it. "We can't stay," she said reluctantly. "The authorities don't like it when we remain in one place too long. And if those men from the alley report seeing us here, then we'll deal with that when it happens," Marcus said firmly. "For now, you're safe, fed, and warm. That's enough." He pulled a blanket from a closet and handed it to Zara. "You can take the couch with your sister. I'll sleep in the chair. We can't ask you to give up your bed." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He settled into a worn recliner, pulling another blanket over himself. "Get some sleep, Zara. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." As she lay down beside Kira, sharing the warmth of Marcus's jacket and the soft cushions of the couch, Zara felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Not just hope, that was too large, too dangerous to fully embrace yet, but possibility. The simple, radical possibility that maybe, just maybe, not all humans were their enemies. In the growing light of dawn, she closed her eyes and dreamed of home. Zara woke to the sound of Marcus moving quietly around the kitchenette, the gentle clatter of dishes, and the soft hiss of bacon in a pan. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her sleep-addled mind expecting to see the crystal spires of Velos Prime through the window. Instead, she saw the gray industrial landscape of New Berlin, and reality crashed back over her like cold water. Beside her, Kira was still sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and her color much improved from the night before. The silver markings around her eyes had regained some of their luminescence, not fully restored, but no longer the dull gray of near death. "Morning," Marcus said softly, noticing she was awake. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of calling in sick to work today. Figured you might need someone around while you figure things out." The simple consideration in his words made Zara's throat tighten with emotion. When was the last time someone had put her needs before their own? Her parents, probably, in those final days before the evacuation ships arrived. "You don't have to do that," she said, sitting up carefully to avoid waking Kira. "We've already imposed too much." Impose. Marcus turned from the stove, spatula in hand. "Last I checked, I was the one who invited you here. Besides, breakfast is better with company." The smell of cooking food made Zara's stomach growl audibly, and she realized that despite the soup last night, her body was still desperately craving nourishment. Marcus seemed to notice her expression and smiled. "Bacon and eggs coming right up. I wasn't sure about your dietary restrictions, so I kept it simple." "We can eat most human foods," Zara said, then hesitated. "Though we probably shouldn't have too much meat at first. Our systems aren't used to it anymore." Marcus nodded and adjusted the portions accordingly, adding extra scrambled eggs and toast to make up the difference. As he cooked, Zara found herself studying him more carefully in the morning light. He was perhaps 40 years old, with premature gray threading through his dark hair and the kind of lean build that came from physical labor rather than gymnasium workouts. His movements were economical, practiced, the gestures of someone who had learned to take care of himself and others. "Marcus," she said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "Do you live alone?" "No family." His hand paused for just a moment in its stirring of the eggs. Had a family once. Wife and daughter. They died in the Proxima Station bombing early in the war. Zara's blood turned to ice. Proxima Station had been one of the Velosian military's most controversial targets. A civilian research facility that had allegedly been developing biological weapons. The attack had killed over 2,000 people, including many families of military personnel. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry." Marcus glanced at her, saw the horror and guilt written across her features. "Hey," he said gently, setting down the spatula and moving to sit across from her. "You didn't pull the trigger. You were probably just a kid when it happened. But my people did it. My government, my military. Your people also tried to stop it," Marcus interrupted. "I read the declassified reports after the war ended. There was a faction within your military command that opposed targeting civilian installations. They were overruled by the extremists, but they tried." Zara stared at him, struggling to process this information. "You researched us after losing your family?" "I researched the war," he corrected. "All of it. Every battle, every decision, every atrocity committed by both sides. Because I needed to understand how something like that could happen, how two civilizations could nearly destroy each other over resources and territory." He returned to the stove, plating the food with steady hands despite the weight of the conversation. "What I learned was that wars aren't fought by species or nations. They're fought by individuals making choices, and most of those individuals are just trying to protect the people they love." Kira stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She spoke a few words in their native language, and Zara translated. "She's asking if she's dreaming," Zara said with a small smile. "The smell of real food seems too good to be true." Marcus carried over a plate arranged with small portions, perfect for someone recovering from malnutrition. "Tell her it's real, and there's plenty more where that came from." As they ate breakfast together, Zara found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced since childhood. The conversation flowed naturally between topics, Marcus asking about their homeworld, the sisters describing the crystal cities and singing forests of Velos Prime. In return, he told them about his work as a mechanic, the satisfaction of fixing broken things and making them whole again. "It's not glamorous," he admitted, "but there's something honest about it. A machine either works or it doesn't. No politics, no hidden agendas. Just problem solving." "Our father was an engineer," Kira said in halting English, her first words spoken directly to Marcus. "He said similar things about design problems." Marcus's face lit up at hearing her voice. "What kind of engineering?" "Structural crystals," Zara answered when Kira looked uncertain about the translation. "On our world, we grew buildings instead of constructing them. Our parents designed the harmonic frequencies that shaped the crystal matrices." "Fascinating," Marcus said, and his interest seemed genuine rather than polite. "I'd love to hear more about that sometime." The easy domesticity of the moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. All three of them froze, the relaxed atmosphere evaporating instantly. Marcus held up a hand, signaling for them to stay quiet, and moved to the window. "Immigration Services," he said quietly, his expression grim. "Two officers." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as the familiar panic flooded her system. Immigration meant deportation hearings, detention facilities, and ultimately, a return to space aboard ships bound for nowhere. Most refugee transports simply ejected their passengers at the nearest uninhabited system, leaving them to die slowly in the void. "The bathroom," Marcus said urgently. "Both of you now. Don't make a sound." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Marcus Chen. We need to speak with you about harboring undocumented aliens." Zara grabbed Kira's hand and pulled her toward the bathroom, her mind racing. How had they been found so quickly? Had the men from the alley reported them after all? Or was it simply routine surveillance of known refugee sympathizers? Through the thin bathroom door, she could hear Marcus opening the front door. "Officers," he said calmly, "what can I do for you?" "We have reports of 2 Velosian females being seen in this area last night," a woman's voice replied. "Witnesses say you intervened in an altercation involving them." "I broke up a fight in the alley behind Morrison's bar," Marcus confirmed. 3 guys picking on someone smaller than them. Didn't get a good look at who they were hassling. Too dark and rainy. "Mr. Chen, harboring undocumented aliens is a federal crime," a second voice added, male and more aggressive than his partner. "The penalty includes up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines." "I'm aware of the law, Officer Rodriguez, and my partner is Agent Williams. We'd like to search your apartment." "Do you have a warrant?" There was a pause, and Zara could almost feel the tension radiating through the walls. In the cramped bathroom, Kira pressed close against her, trembling not with cold now, but with pure terror. "We don't need a warrant for a consensual search," Agent Williams said finally. "You have nothing to hide, do you, Mr. Chen?" "I have plenty to hide," Marcus replied evenly. "Tax documents, medical records, personal correspondence. All the private things that make up a life. But nothing illegal." "Then you won't mind if we take a look around." Another pause. Zara closed her eyes, knowing that Marcus was facing an impossible choice. Refuse the search and confirm their suspicions, or allow it and watch 2 innocent girls be dragged away to almost certain death. "Actually, I do mind," Marcus said finally. "Come back with a warrant, officers. Until then, I'd like you to leave my property." Zara's eyes snapped open in shock. He was protecting them, even knowing the consequences. Even knowing that his defiance would bring more scrutiny, more questions, more danger. "This isn't over, Chen," Officer Rodriguez said, her voice tight with frustration. "We'll be back." "I'm sure you will be," Marcus replied. "Have a good day." The door closed, and Zara heard the sound of locks being engaged. A moment later, Marcus tapped softly on the bathroom door. "They're gone," he said. "But they'll be back, probably with a warrant this time." Zara opened the door, feeling simultaneously grateful and guilty. "Marcus, you can't do this. You're risking everything for us." "What I'm risking is my freedom," he corrected. "What you're risking is your lives. There's no comparison." Kira spoke rapidly in their language, her voice urgent and frightened. Zara listened, then turned back to Marcus. "She says we should turn ourselves in. She doesn't want you to go to prison because of us." Marcus knelt down to Kira's eye level, speaking directly to her even though he knew she might not understand every word. "Listen to me, kid. I've lost everything that mattered to me once already. My wife, my daughter, my old life, all gone. But helping you too. That's not a loss. That's the first thing that's felt like living in 5 years." He stood up, decision crystallizing in his expression. "We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. I know a place, but it means leaving the city." "Where?" Zara asked. "My brother has a cabin up in the mountains, about 3 hours' drive from here. Off the grid, isolated, stocked with supplies. He won't mind if we borrow it for a while." The plan was simple in its desperation. Pack light, leave through the building's service entrance, and drive straight through to the mountains before immigration services could organize a proper manhunt. But as they gathered the few possessions the sisters had, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were running towards something larger than simple refuge. For the first time since the war began, she was part of family again. The old pickup truck wheezed its way up the mountain road, its engine protesting every steep grade and hairpin turn. In the passenger seat, Zara gripped the door handle with white knuckles, not from fear of the driving, but from the overwhelming surrealism of the moment. Just 24 hours ago, she and Kira had been dying in an alley. Now they were fleeing into the wilderness with a human who had risked everything to save them. Behind them, Kira slept fitfully against a pile of blankets Marcus had thrown in the truck bed, covered by a tarp that made her invisible to any passing aircraft. The mountains rose around them like ancient guardians, their peaks shrouded in mist and their slopes thick with evergreen forests that reminded Zora painfully of home. "Tell me about the singing forests," Marcus said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. They had been driving in comfortable silence for the past hour, but now he seemed to sense her need for distraction. Zara glanced at him, surprised by the request. "You really want to know?" "I really want to know. I've read about them in the war documentation, but those were military reports. Cold, tactical assessments. I want to hear what they meant to you." She closed her eyes, letting the memories flow back despite the pain they brought. Imagine trees that aren't quite trees, crystal formations that grew like living things, reaching toward our twin suns. The wind would pass through their hollow chambers and create music, different melodies depending on the season, the time of day, even the emotional state of the listeners. Emotional state. The crystals were partially telepathic, she explained. They responded to the collective consciousness of nearby Velosians. During festivals, when everyone was happy, the forests would sing celebration songs that could be heard for kilometers. During times of mourning, she trailed off, remembering the last days before the evacuation, when the forests had wailed like wounded animals. "They sang your grief," Marcus said softly. "Yes, and our fear, and our desperation. In the end, I think they were trying to comfort us, but it just made everything worse. Like having your own sorrow reflected back at you amplified 1,000-fold. The truck crested a particularly steep rise, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. A vast valley carved between towering peaks, its floor dotted with alpine lakes that gleamed like scattered jewels. Marcus pulled over at a scenic overlook and killed the engine. "We're about halfway there," he said. "Thought you might want to stretch your legs, check on Kira." They climbed out of the truck, and Zara immediately felt the difference in the air. It was thinner up here, cleaner, with a crispness that cut through her lungs like winter wine. Kira stirred under the tarp, blinking owlishly in the mountain sunlight. "Where are we?" she asked in their language. "Safe," Zara replied, helping her sister out of the truck bed. "At least for now." The three of them stood at the overlook's edge, looking out over the pristine wilderness. It was beautiful in a way that was utterly different from Vela's prime. Harsh where their homeworld had been gentle, ancient where theirs had been eternally young. But it was beauty nonetheless, and Zara felt something loosening in her chest that had been wound tight since the day they fled their dying world. "It's magnificent," she said, and meant it. "My brother Tom used to bring me up here when we were kids," Marcus said, leaning against the truck's tailgate. "After our parents died, he basically raised me. Said the mountains taught you perspective, that your problems, no matter how big they seemed, were just tiny specks in the grand scheme of things." "Is he still alive?" Kira asked in careful English, her vocabulary improving rapidly through necessity. Marcus nodded. "Last I heard, he was working on a terraforming project in the Centauri system. We don't talk much anymore. He thinks I'm wasting my life fixing broken appliances instead of using my engineering degree. But he wouldn't begrudge me the use of his cabin, especially for a good cause." They resumed driving, the road growing narrower and more primitive as they climbed higher into the mountains. Eventually, the pavement gave way to gravel, then to a dirt track that seemed barely wide enough for the truck. Just when Zara was beginning to wonder if they were lost, Marcus turned down an almost invisible path between the trees. The cabin emerged from the forest like something from a fairy tale, a structure of rough-hewn logs and river stone that seemed to have grown naturally from the mountainside. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, and a small stream bubbled past the front porch, feeding into a pond that reflected the surrounding pines like a mirror. "Home sweet home," Marcus said, parking beside a stack of split firewood. "At least for the foreseeable future." Inside, the cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside. The main room featured a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and walls lined with books and outdoor gear. A compact kitchen occupied one corner, while a loft accessible by ladder provided additional sleeping space. It was rustic, but well appointed, clearly designed by someone who understood the value of self-sufficiency. "There's a generator in the shed if the solar power isn't enough," Marcus explained, setting down their meager bags. "The stream provides fresh water, and Tom keeps the pantry stocked with non-perishables. We should be able to stay here for weeks if necessary." Kira immediately gravitated toward the fireplace, running her hands over the carved wooden mantelpiece. "It feels safe," she said wonderingly, "like a fortress made of comfort instead of walls." Marcus smiled at the observation. That's exactly what Tom intended. After the war, a lot of veterans needed places to heal. He built this as a refuge for anyone who needed to get away from the world for a while. As evening fell, they settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Marcus built a fire while the sisters explored their new surroundings, marveling at details that spoke of human craftsmanship and care. Hand-carved furniture, quilts sewn with geometric patterns, shelves lined with books on everything from engineering to philosophy. Over dinner prepared from canned goods and dried provisions, they continued sharing stories. Marcus told them about his childhood in the mountains, learning to hunt and fish and survive in the wilderness. The sisters reciprocated with tales of their education on Velos Prime, the complex mathematical harmonies required to grow crystal structures, the philosophical debates that could rage for days over the proper alignment of architectural elements. "It sounds like paradise," Marcus said wistfully. It was, Zara agreed. "But paradise can make you soft. When the war came, we weren't prepared for that kind of hatred. We couldn't understand how anyone could choose destruction over creation." "Maybe that's not a weakness," Marcus suggested. "Maybe the universe needs people who choose creation, even when destruction seems easier." That night, they slept more peacefully than any of them had in months. The sisters shared the loft, while Marcus took the couch downstairs. The silence of the mountains was profound. No traffic, no sirens, no sounds of human conflict. Only the whisper of wind through pine branches and the gentle burble of the stream. Zara woke before dawn, drawn by an unfamiliar sound filtering through the cabin's walls. She slipped quietly down the ladder and stepped onto the front porch, where she found Marcus sitting on the steps with a steaming cup of coffee, staring up at the lightening sky. "Hear that?" he asked without turning around. She listened carefully, then gasped in recognition. It was music, not quite the crystal songs of home, but something similar. The wind moving through the pine needles created a soft, rhythmic susurrus that rose and fell like breathing. "The trees are singing," she whispered. "Tom always said they were." "I thought he was being poetic, but—" Marcus shrugged. "Maybe poetry is just another way of seeing truth." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun crested the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. For the first time since leaving Velos Prime, Zara felt something approaching peace. Not the naive contentment of her youth, but something deeper and more durable. The peace that comes from accepting loss without being destroyed by it. "Marcus," she said finally, "what happens now? We can't hide up here forever." "Maybe not forever," he agreed. "But long enough. Long enough for you to heal, for Kira to grow stronger, for the political situation back in the city to stabilize. There are people working to change the refugee policies, to give your people a real chance at integration instead of just warehousing you until you die. And if they don't succeed—" Marcus turned to look at her fully, his brown eyes serious but not despairing. "Then we'll figure out something else. Together." The simple certainty in his voice made Zara's throat tighten with emotion. After so much loss, so much betrayal, the idea of having allies again felt almost too precious to believe. "Why us?" she asked. "Out of all the refugees you could have helped, why did you choose us?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. I don't know if I chose you, he said finally. Maybe you chose me. Maybe we all chose each other. Sometimes the right people just find each other at the right time. As if summoned by their conversation, Kira appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep and her silver markings bright with returning health. She looked out at the mountain vista, then at Marcus and Zara sitting together on the porch steps. Family, she said in English, the word clear and certain. Marcus smiled, and Zara felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the universe. Home wasn't a place you came from. It was the people who chose to stand with you when everything else fell apart. Yes, she said, reaching out to take both their hands. Family. 3 weeks passed in the mountain refuge, and with each day, the 3 inhabitants of the cabin grew more comfortable with their unlikely arrangement. Zara found herself taking on the role of teacher, helping Marcus understand the complex philosophical frameworks that had guided Velosian society. In return, he taught her practical skills: how to maintain the solar power system, how to preserve food for long-term storage, how to read the weather patterns that swept across the mountain peaks. Kira blossomed in the clean mountain air and abundant sunshine. Her silver markings had returned to their full luminescence, and she had gained back much of the weight she'd lost during their months on the streets. More importantly, she was beginning to laugh again, a sound that filled the cabin with warmth more effectively than any fire. But their peaceful interlude couldn't last forever. Marcus returned from a supply run to the nearest town with news that made all their hearts sink. Immigration services raided my apartment 3 days ago, he reported, setting down bags of groceries with hands that trembled slightly. According to the clerk at the general store, they're expanding their search to include all known associates of refugee sympathizers. They're looking for us specifically. Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. 2 Velosian females, approximately 19 and 16 years old, traveling with a human male. They've issued a federal warrant for harboring fugitives. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I'm sorry. I thought we had more time. Kira, who had been reading a book about human history by the fireplace, looked up with worry creasing her features. What does this mean? It means we need to leave the country, Zara said heavily, before they expand their search to include all remote properties owned by your family members. Marcus nodded grimly. I've been thinking about that. There are people who help refugees cross borders illegally, human smugglers who don't care about species as long as the price is right. The problem is, they're expensive, dangerous, and most of them can't be trusted. What's the alternative? Zara asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Turn ourselves in and hope for the best in the legal system, Marcus replied. But given the current political climate, he didn't need to finish the sentence. All of them had seen the news reports. Refugee detention facilities overcrowded to the point of humanitarian crisis, deportation ships disappearing into deep space with no record of their final destinations, politicians making speeches about alien contamination, and the need for species purity. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace sharing what might be their last peaceful meal together, Kira surprised them both by speaking up. I want to fight, she said in carefully enunciated English. Zara blinked in surprise. What do you mean, little sister? Not fight with weapons, Kira clarified, switching to their native language for the complex concepts. Fight with truth. If people fear us because they don't understand us, then we must help them understand. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued despite the gravity of their situation. What are you thinking? Kira's eyes brightened with the kind of passionate intensity their father had shown when discussing his most ambitious architectural projects. The human information networks, what you call the internet. It reaches billions of people instantly. What if we told our story? What if we showed them that we're not monsters or invaders, but just people who lost their home? The authorities would find us within hours, Zara protested. Any broadcast signal could be traced back to its source. Not if we were smart about it, Marcus said thoughtfully. There are ways to mask digital transmissions, to bounce signals through multiple servers and make them almost impossible to trace. I'm not an expert, but I know people who are. People who would help us. People who believe that truth is more important than politics, Marcus confirmed. Veterans, mostly. People who saw what really happened during the war and came home disgusted by how both governments had manipulated their populations. The plan that emerged over the next few hours was audacious in its simplicity. They would create a series of video messages, not propaganda or political statements, but simple human stories. Zara would talk about her childhood on Vela's Prime, about her parents' work and the beauty of the crystal cities. Kira would share her dreams for the future, her hopes of someday becoming an engineer like their father. Marcus would speak about his decision to help them, about the process of moving from hatred to understanding. The key is authenticity, Marcus explained as he contacted his underground network of tech-savvy veterans. People are tired of being lied to by their governments. They want real stories from real people. Within 2 days, a coded message arrived through secure channels. A former military communications specialist named Elena Vasquez would help them, but they had to move fast. She had equipment hidden in an abandoned warehouse outside Denver, and she could give them exactly one chance to broadcast their message before the authorities triangulated their position. The journey to Denver took them back down from their mountain sanctuary, through valleys that had begun to feel like home. As they descended toward the city sprawl, all three felt the weight of leaving safety behind. But there was also something else, a sense of purpose that had been missing from their desperate flight across the country. Elena Vasquez met them at the warehouse as promised, a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much war. She greeted Marcus with the casual familiarity of old soldiers, but her expression softened when she saw the sisters. "Jesus, they're just kids," she muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry. It's just, all the propaganda makes your people sound like monsters. But you look like my daughter did at that age." The warehouse had been converted into a sophisticated broadcast facility, with cameras, lighting equipment, and computer servers that hummed with barely contained power. Elena explained that she had spent the years since the war ended documenting veteran testimonies, creating a record of what had really happened that couldn't be suppressed by official channels. "Your story fits perfectly with what I'm trying to do," she told them as she adjusted camera angles. "Show people that war turns everyone into victims, regardless of which side they're on." They spent hours preparing, crafting their messages with the care of artists, creating their masterpieces. Zara spoke about the singing forests, about her parents' belief that architecture should serve life rather than dominate it. Her voice carried the weight of loss, but also the resilience of hope, painting a picture of Velosian culture that was beautiful rather than threatening. Kira, despite her youth, proved to be a natural communicator. She talked about her dream of building bridges, not just physical structures, but connections between species and cultures. "I want to create buildings that sing like our forests did," she said, her eyes bright with passion. "Places where humans and Velosians can work together, learn from each other." Marcus spoke last, his testimony raw with the honesty of someone who had walked the path from vengeance to forgiveness. "I lost my family to this war," he said simply. "For years, I thought hatred was the only rational response. But hatred just creates more hatred. These girls didn't kill my wife and daughter. They're survivors, just like the rest of us, trying to build something better from the ruins." When the recording was complete, Elena began the complex process of uploading and distributing their message across dozens of networks simultaneously. "Once this goes live, you'll have maybe 6 hours before they track you down," she warned. "I suggest you use that time wisely." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first hour, their video had been viewed over 1 million times. Comments poured in from across the globe, some supportive, others hostile, but all engaging with their story rather than dismissing it as enemy propaganda. More importantly, established journalists began picking up the story. News outlets that had previously parroted government talking points about alien threats suddenly found themselves with a human interest story that was impossible to ignore. The sisters' faces, young, vulnerable, undeniably real, began appearing on screens across the planet. But success came with a price. By the 6th hour, military vehicles were surrounding the warehouse. Elena had already disappeared, her part in their story complete, but Marcus, Zara, and Kira found themselves facing the inevitable confrontation they had fled for so long. "This is Immigration Services," a voice announced through a bullhorn. "The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." Marcus looked at the sisters, seeing his own mixture of fear and determination reflected in their faces. "We knew this moment would come," he said quietly. "Are you sorry?" Zara asked. "About helping us, about everything that's happened." Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Look outside," he said, nodding toward the windows. "Look at what we've accomplished." Through the warehouse windows, they could see something unprecedented. A crowd of human protesters had gathered outside the police perimeter. Signs reading "Sanctuary for All" and "Refugees Welcome" bobbed above the heads of hundreds of people who had seen their broadcast and decided to act. "We're not alone anymore," Kira observed wonderingly. "No," Marcus agreed. "We're not." They walked out of the warehouse together, hands raised but heads held high. The arrest was swift and professional, but as they were loaded into separate vehicles, they could hear the crowd chanting their names. Their story had sparked something larger than themselves, a movement toward understanding that no government could easily suppress.